The men we've lost to the manosphere love to fancy themselves stoics. They took this ancient philosophy, embraced the easy parts, and subsequently built their whole entire identity around it. But listen, my dear manosphere brother, what you practice is not stoicism. What you practice is Broicism, the Timu version that is frankly an insult to actual stoics. Let me remind you what stoicism is. At its core, it's a Greek and Roman philosophy that, among other things, says you cannot control everything that happens to you, but you can always control how you respond. Cool. But reducing stoicism to mostly that is like describing the pyramids to someone by saying they're like big triangles in the sand. It's not untrue, but it's missing so much information and context that it's also not true. What the manosphere does is both unsurprising and slightly frustrating. They cherry-pick the parts that cost them nothing and pretend the rest doesn't even exist. Stoicism is built on 4 pillars, or virtues. Pillar 1 is wisdom, using reason and knowledge to see the world clearly and make good moral judgments. It's about understanding what truly matters and what doesn't. If you lack wisdom, you can't practice the other virtues. Pillar 2 is courage, not just physical bravery, but moral courage. The strength to do what's right, even when it's difficult, uncomfortable, or costs you something. This includes standing up for your principles and facing your own flaws honestly. Pillar 3 is justice, treating others fairly and recognizing your obligations to your community. This means acting with integrity, honoring social bonds, and understanding that humans are fundamentally built for connection. You cannot be virtuous in isolation. Pillar 4 is temperance. It's self-discipline and moderation in all things. So this means controlling your desires, managing your reactions, and practicing restraint. It's developed through daily practice, journaling, self-examination, and holding yourself accountable. The manosphere mostly claims wisdom and temperance, but again, the Timu translation of those virtues. Because instead of using wisdom to guide morality, they use rationality to suppress emotion under the guise of false objectivity. And instead of practicing temperance as self-discipline towards virtue, they practice it as emotional suppression and rigid self-optimization for status and dominance. Here's the problem. If all you do is implement a form of rationality that is devoid of morality, virtue, humanity, and self-discipline, you become antisocial. You become someone who can't connect, cannot empathize, and cannot function in genuine relationship with others, which is the clinical definition of antisocial. Not just rude, but fundamentally unable to orient toward other people in a meaningful way. Broicism is about aggressive self-optimization, about status, and about dominance. It sees relationships and often women through the lens of possession and hierarchy. It is obsessed with winning, with being unbothered and being the most rational person. Now go back to the virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Broicism contradicts every single one of them. Ego is not wisdom. Dominance and emotional suppression is not courage. Hierarchy is not justice. And the part where the actual work should take place, in temperance, in self-discipline, is focused mostly on money, status, and ownership instead of virtue. But why? Why are the bros so attracted to Stoicism particularly? Well, I think Marcus Aurelius is definitely a big part of the appeal. He's like their Michael Jackson or Prince or Whitney Houston. He was a Roman emperor who wielded a lot of power. The bros definitely want some of that aura. So they took the one part of his philosophy that confirmed what men societally were already taught: suppress your emotions. But they ignored the part where Aurelius was ruthless about confronting himself with himself every single day. Because that's actually hard, and it does take emotional, moral, and intellectual discipline. Precisely the things that Broicism teaches the bros to avoid. And what the bros also conveniently ignore is that some of the great Stoics were nothing like Marcus Aurelius. The founder of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium, was a Phoenician merchant who lost everything in his shipwreck. He ended up in Athens with nothing, and from that total loss, he came to the conclusion that you should act virtuously anyway. That's the birthplace of Stoicism. Another Stoic was Epictetus. He was born a slave and later freed. He then became one of the most influential philosophers in history. He wrote extensively about human dignity and moral obligation. As a slave, Epictetus had every reason to conclude that life was something that happened to you and that you simply had to endure it. Instead, he concluded the opposite. You have an obligation to act with dignity and morality regardless of what has been done to you. Marcus Aurelius's writing wouldn't even have been possible without Epictetus. And in his private journals, Aurelius writes down that he existed to serve others, that power without virtue was meaningless, and that his obligation was to humanity, not to himself. That is the man that the Broics are claiming. It would be hilarious if it wasn't toxic in practice. Look, Stoicism is an interesting philosophical worldview, but Broicism, on the other hand, is a philosophy-shaped excuse for not actually engaging with your own brain. It takes one tiny part of Stoicism, strips it of everything that gave it meaning, and uses that to avoid moral accountability while feeling intellectually superior. The actual Stoics, from the founder who lost everything to the man who was born into slavery and the emperor with infinite power, would immediately reject the insulting version of Stoicism that runs rampant through the red pill community today. So please, stop insulting the people who actually put in work to be a productive part of humanity. Maybe pick up a book and work on yourself. Because being human is riveting, but only if you're willing to do some work.